Hey everyone, welcome to the Jazz Piano School podcast, episode number 37. So, I got a great episode for you today. In this episode, I'm going to be going over left-hand components of solo piano. I've gotten a lot of requests on this, so it's a really, really tough subject, and it'll be a constant grind, I guess, to go through and work on this, but once you kind of understand these foundational components of the left hand, then you'll be able to play solo piano so much easier. So that's what I'm going to help you try and accomplish today. And as always, guys, thank you so much for listening. My name is Brendan Lowe. I'm your host for jazzpianoschool.com. The website's going great. I'm adding new content, new videos. I add new videos weekly, jazzpianoschool.com. And I'm adding blog posts and these podcasts as well. So there will always be a fresh release of content on a weekly basis. Also on Instagram and the blog, I release a lick of the day. If you prefer to get it through Instagram, you can do that, or even Facebook. I publish it to all my social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But the analysis and the music and the video is all in one place if you want that, and that's on the blog on a day-to-day basis, so you can find that there. So let's get into this episode, left-hand components of solo piano. So many people are like, Brendan, what do I do when I play solo piano? It's so hard for my left hand. I just don't know, what to do with it. It just feels awkward. I can't play chords all the time. Well, the answer to this question is your left hand has to do everything. So it's got a lot to do. It's got to account for bass notes, all right? It's got to account for chords and harmonies. It has to account for rhythm. It has to account for not interfering with the melody. It has to play in the correct register when you're playing a piece. So I've gone over playing tunes with your right hand and chords in your left hand. That's easy. If we play a piece like Autumn Leaves, and we have chords in our left hand, all right? So here's my first chord, a C minor 7 chord. I'd play. So those are all root position chords. Obviously, if you're more advanced, you can voice lead your chords, right, using different inversions. And all of these previous steps, guys, if you haven't listened to the podcast episodes, are in earlier podcasts, so you can go back and check these out. But if you want to voice lead your chords, you can do this. It's going to sound a lot better, right? But just playing, you can also play your rootless voicings. I completely forgot. I've covered rootless voicings. So what we want to do now is actually incorporate our rootless voicings into the tune, and this is going to bring me to the first step. We can't always just play chords, right? Because we don't get a lot of the bass motion in our left hand. So we need to leave the chords, and this is how independent our left hand has to be. It's going to be moving around a lot, and we need to get comfortable with it moving. So the first texture I want to talk about, obviously we can just play chords, and we can just play bass notes, and that's going to sound great too, just playing roots, right? Okay? But that also doesn't account for the chords. So you want everything to be together. That's what's going to sound best when we're playing solo piano. But how do we combine them? It's hard. The first thing you want to do is practice switching up the chords you're most comfortable with. Most comfortable, because we don't want to be searching for chords. And we want to include bass notes. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to include a bass note. If I choose to add bass notes for a measure, I'm just going to add bass notes. If I choose to add chords for a measure, I'm just going to add chords. In this way, we're systematically putting together roots, bass notes, and harmonies at the same time, so we're getting both of them in the picture. All right, so let's say for the first measure, I choose just to play a bass note. And then for the second measure, I choose to play a chord. So what I'm going to do is jump to my chord. Now this is a little bit low, right? So if you know a better inversion, hopefully you can play an inversion of that, right? Now in the third measure, I might play a chord and then maybe jump to a bass note. Maybe bass note and then chord. All right, so I'm picking and choosing whether I want to play bass notes or chords. Now, playing this over a tune is probably not the best way. Probably the blues is a little bit better, just because you can pick and switch and the changes aren't moving so fast. So let's actually do a blues. I'm going to switch to blues instead. So let's say I have a blues. You know, I won't play a melody, maybe I'll just solo. This is how we'd solo, but basically you might hit a bass note for a measure. So in F blues. Whoa, sorry. So sometimes your left hand's playing bass notes, and sometimes it's playing chords, however you want to play the chords. And again, you can play rootless voicings too if you learn your rootless voicing really well, which would probably sound the best. But I'm jumping from, I'm either going to pick a chord or a bass note, and I'm going to stick with that in one measure. So here's what it would sound like if I was improvising with my left hand playing solo piano. And I'll just play simple melodies over here. Right? So my left hand is going back and forth, just playing either roots and then a chord, right? So root, chord, and you're gonna pick based on the measure. Now, as you start to get more comfortable with this, you can do it with either less or more time in between. So I could play a root and a chord in one measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I can just stay on a root for 2 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then maybe go to a chord. But what you want to do is get comfortable with leaving that space in your left hand. So your left hand doesn't always have to be doing something. Like, just start as simple as possible with either a chord or a bass note, right? And you can get comfortable with the space in between, kind of like a monk style. Like, let me give you an example. So my left hand, it's okay to leave space, right? So here we go. So did you hear all that space in between my left hand? I just played a root and then a chord. Now let me see how many beats that was. That was basically almost two measures. So I left all space. So you can leave as much space as you want in between and pick and choose where you want the bass notes to go. And drop the tempo, right? When you're practicing this, drop the tempo really slow. So I might play. So I'm just picking and choosing my bass notes and chords, all right? The next component I want to talk about is just 1 and 7 or 1, 3, and 7. You have those two options. These are great options for solo piano. When you're left hand, you don't need much at all, because just having that presence there is just going to add so much. So just 1, 3, and 7, however you want to do it, or just 1 and 7. All right, this is what McCoy used a lot in his left-hand voicing, just 1, 3, and 7, that's it. So what we want to do here, again, like over a blues, you can just use 1 and 7. So here's an example of that. All right, so 1, 3, and 7, or 1 and 7, and that works great. Just playing super simple. Now, obviously, the next step would be to combine that with the last step. So sometimes we use 1 and 7, sometimes we use 1, 3, and 7, sometimes we use a full chord, and sometimes we use bass notes, or sometimes we use both in one measure. And it just takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable switching up these different components. So I'm going to use all the components I've talked about thus far in the blues now. Okay, here we go. Here we go, a second time. All right, so I was being a little honky tonk just so you could hear like the different components drastically. So, you know, obviously you don't want to wail on the left hand like I was doing, but I mean, Monk did, but I guess if that's your style, whatever. Anyway, so we have, let me see, bass notes, chords. We have 1 and 7, 1, 3 and 7, okay? And that's how we combine our left hand, all right? I'll get into some more further advanced left hand components, but let me see, let's apply it to a tune now, so not just the blues, so I can show you what I mean by this, how we arrange our hands. And if you listen to the episode on beginner piano arranging, if I'm playing Autumn Leaves or something like that, I'm going to include the shells underneath the melody and choose one of my left hand components. So I might play a chord, I might play 1, 3 and 7, I might play a bass note. I might just play 1 and 7. And in that case, if I'm playing 1 and 7, I'm definitely going to add the third below my melody in the right hand. Does that make sense? So if I leave the third out, my right hand is going to play the third underneath the melody. Here's what I'm talking about. So on Autumn Leaves, we actually happen to land on the third of the C minor, but let's say the melody was an F. Okay, I'll change Autumn Leaves and create my new tune. So if I'm playing 1 and 7, I'm going to want to add the third. Now in this case, it's kind of hard to add the third below this melody note here, right? So in this case, I wouldn't want to, if you want to reach, right, that sounds good, but I'd probably add it in my left hand. If the melody was something simpler, like, I can easily add the third here. The main point though is if you're playing 1 and 7 in your left hand, you're going to want to add the third below whatever the melody note is, all right? We have 1, 3 and 7. We can play a full chord, any inversion, or we can play a bass note. So here is Autumn Leaves. I'll play it nice and slow using all the left hand components I just talked about over the blues, all right? Ah, sorry. Just bass notes, right? Maybe throw in a chord. Right, so I'm switching my left hand back and forth. And I know you're like, oh my God, I can never do that. But you want to start with the components individually, all right? Obviously, you will not be able to do this all at once. So you want to practice. Your first practice step is going to be taking a single component and working on that. So just take your 1s and 7s and practice 1 and 7 and creating a rhythmic bass, okay? Not bass, root bass, but like a rhythmic foundation while you play the melody. Sorry. So I'm just 1 and 7 my left hand. That was a little too low. All right, so you take each component individually, and that way you're able to really work on that, and you just start to work on each component separately and then start to combine them very, very slowly. Like you combine 1 and 7 with bass notes very, very slowly. All right, so right? Just nice and slow. I'm practicing my movements with my left hand, right? And all the space in the middle is okay, right? Okay, so my left hand's getting used to making those jumps and picking and choosing what I want it to do while I'm playing the melody with my right hand. And if you noticed, I'm not harmonizing the melody at all because my left hand is kind of doing all the harmonic work. During a ballad and stuff like that, we'll need to add more harmonies, but during like a medium swing tempo, my right hand can play single note melodies while my left hand jumps around. So I hope this helps you guys with your left hand a little bit. Practice all those components separately and start to apply them to certain pieces and use those different components, take them through different pieces and start to combine them and you know, switch them up, try and use all of them, try and use just one, try and use a couple, and eventually your left hand will be very, very independent from your right hand and creating a nice, really nice foundation for your right hand to play melodies over and solo over as well. All right, guys, so thanks so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. And as always, happy practicing.